I'm a WEAC Planning Committee member and a member of Community Board 9. I'm here to introduce Congressman Espaillat. New York State Congressman Adriano Espaillat serves the 13th Congressional District, which includes portions of Harlem, Inwood, Marble Hill, Spanish Harlem, Washington Heights, Morningside Heights, and the Upper West Side. He is originally from the Dominican Republic and grew up in Washington Heights. He previously worked as Manhattan Court Services Coordinator for the New York City Criminal Justice Agency and was an active member of Community Board 12 and the 34th Precinct Community Council. He served terms in the State Assembly and Senate, where he served on the Environmental Conservation Standing Committee. He is the first formally undocumented immigrant to serve in Congress when he was elected in 2016. He is a member of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus and chairs the CHC Task Force for Transportation, Infrastructure, and Housing. He's also a member of the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Foreign Affairs. Thank you for being here.
Let me make sure.
Okay.
Home Energy Assistance Program and the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program. What we are concerned about is that the climate crisis is pushing more people in the hot season to really need air conditioning so that they're not getting heat stroke. And this program provides money to buy air conditioners, but not for paying electrical bills for air conditioners.
Well, I'm supportive of that, and in addition to that, I've also ensured that we continue to get funding, over $4 million for Harlem, Northern Manhattan, and the Northwest Bronx for weatherization programs, which are for the installation of new windows that will reduce the consumption of energy in buildings throughout the district. And this has been a very effective program that Northern Manhattan Improvement Corporation has done for many years in the Northern Manhattan part of the district. They are also not-for-profits in the Northwest Bronx and in Harlem that are receiving the funding at about $1 million a clip for each of the organizations. I think Northern Manhattan gets a little bit more because it has a larger footprint to cover. So this is also a part of this dynamic that we hope to continue to get funding from the federal government to ensure that we reduce the cost of energy. I'm also working on the Small Business Committee to try to replicate a program that was very successful when I was in the state legislature, which is to provide funding grants to small business owners to retrofit their businesses with smart energy equipment, light fixtures, refrigeration, air conditioning equipment, so they could not only reduce the consumption of energy, but it could help them in their pocket. They can reduce their light bill by 30 to 50%. We did 600 businesses when we got a grant after the 1999 blackout, and we worked with Con Edison to install this on over 600 local businesses, and we hope to do it across the congressional district now, and that will be very helpful for businesses in their pocket.
Thing number 2 is about banning mercury and skin lightening cream.
Who's that guy there? That's Sammy Sosa when he was black, huh? Yeah,
So
Sammy.
mercury obviously is toxic, and it has an impact on people's kidneys and renal functions and their urinary tract. And we know that there are alternatives in the marketplace already to the mercury that is put into skin lightening cream, so we want to
I don't
get
need
a ban.
You know where I stand on that.
Okay.
Not just for health reasons, but also
Exactly.
for very identity reasons. Right?
Exactly, and we talked about
Okay.
that earlier too. The Green New Deal, Representative Ocasio-Cortez, obviously with Senator Markey, have introduced a resolution. We talked about the fact that the resolution is a good thing in concept, but as it stands, there are some problems with the resolution, one of which is that it never speaks to the ending of the use of fossil fuels, which is the driver of the climate crisis, and communities like all of those in your district are on the front line of that climate crisis. And so we want to see that strengthened, and We know it's not legislation just yet, it's a resolution.
Correct.
And so as resolutions go, we are starting to work with Representative Ocasio-Cortez's office. I'll also mention to the group that we've started to work with your office on an environmental justice resolution that is an international resolution in scope. And so that's something else that we can add and bring into this particular process, but that conversation has just started. But the Green New Deal and your resolution are things that we want to see moved into law and actually see that they are really strong in cutting off the use of fossil fuels at the end of the day. So that's the Green New Deal. I'm just going to move through quickly so you have, go ahead and respond if you want.
Well, regarding the Green New Deal, I'm an early supporter of it. Let me say a couple of things about it. First of all, I sit now in the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, which is a committee that hopefully will be able to get an infrastructure bill as high as $1 trillion to rebuild the country, 2nd Avenue subway, second phase, right, going north to 125th Street, a bunch of other things. But this presents an opportunity not only to do infrastructure and transportation, but do it green and to provide jobs for local communities, right, that are impacted by climate change, fossil fuels, etc. Charlie Rangel and I are working on an institute, the creation of an institute at City College to help train our young people for the potential green jobs that an infrastructure bill could bring to our communities, right? And we're getting very close to announcing that. I think that's very important, that it's not only making it green, but providing green opportunities for young people in their pockets across our districts, right? With regards to the environmental justice piece that we're working on, Congressman Clayton Powell Jr. had an amendment that was called the Powell Amendment, right? Back in the day. The Powell Amendment basically said that any state engaged in segregation back then would not get funding unless they did away with segregation. But every time he brought it up, it got shot down, it got voted down. But eventually, when the civil rights legislation and the voting rights legislation was put together, it was the language of the Powell Amendment that was used to craft that legislation. So I want to develop an environmental justice amendment to ensure that in every bill, any bill that has to do with the environment, there is a component of environmental justice that will give back to neighborhoods like our neighborhoods that have felt the blunt of asthma, of fossil fuels, of everything under the sun that you could think of. We felt disproportionately the blunt, the hurt of it. And so there needs to be an amendment in each and every one, including the Green New Deal, by the way, a component that addresses and compensates us for the many, many years of hurt that we felt with regards to environmental justice, okay? And so we're working with WEAC in developing that concept. I met with some of the leaders of the committee, and they're very excited about it. So we hope to, just recently we passed in the Foreign Affairs Committee, H.R. 9, which chooses to deny funding for any efforts to get us further away from the Paris Agreement. And so this is exciting from the foreign affair perspective, not just from the environmental perspective, but from our relationships that we have with other countries, right? And how we can push the White House to continue to meet some of the mandates that were established in the Paris Climate Accord. So those are two of the things that are related to the Green New Deal.
Thank you, and we look forward to working with you on that stuff as we move forward. Here's your topic. Did he say what we were talking about earlier? Did you like what he said? Okay. So,
well, let me say to you, infrastructure, right? So I think we worked, when I was in the Senate, we worked on the riverbank plant. The riverbank plant, when it rains...
Just riverbank, for those of you who don't know, that's the sewage treatment.
The sewage treatment plant, right?
North River sewage treatment plant that we were talking about earlier when we were talking about infrastructure.
When it rains a lot, well, first of all, they had a fire there. One of the engines or whatever had a fire, and they had to shut off the plant. And when the plant was shut off, thousands of untreated gallons of untreated sewage water went right into the Hudson without us knowing about it. Now, a 2010 Acura gets stolen, and I get a notice on my phone, right? There's a backup traffic jam on 155th Street on the way to a Yankee game. Guess what? I get a notice on my phone, an alert, right? So thousands of gallons of untreated sewage water were being dumped into the Hudson River, and nobody knew about it, right? And now, of course, the Hudson River, you have the triathlons there, you have all kinds of sports. It's a playground right now. It's no longer the river. And so we worked on getting an alert back then, right? But we also found that when it rains a lot, when you have several days of steady rain, the plant can't hold the volume, so they open it up just as though you had a fire. And then thousands of gallons of untreated sewage water gets dumped into the river. Now, that happens to a degree because New York City doesn't have a green infrastructure, right? To really absorb the rain and prevent the plants and other plants across the city, not just that one, right? From overloading. So when we do infrastructure work, it's not just about roads, bridges, and tunnels. It's about the green infrastructure across the city that will prevent plants like that one from overloading and sending into the river thousands of gallons of untreated sewage water. So I hope to work in the committee in expanding the definition of infrastructure to include the green infrastructure, to include NYCHA also, because we are the landlords of NYCHA, the federal government. So we own it as part of our infrastructure to see if and when we do a bill, an infrastructure bill, we can get the hard dollars to repair NYCHA, to build on the infrastructure that New York City must have, and of course to do things like Gateway and the 2nd Avenue subway.
Okay, so we are obviously very supportive of greening the infrastructure and making it more climate resilient. And certainly through our own worker training program, we talk about making sure that there's access to green jobs. The environmental justice bill we talked about, this is Senator Cory Booker taking leadership starting 3 years ago. And in the House, Rahul Grijalva is the point person and champion on it. Essentially, it would make sure and ensure environmental justice and restore a right of private action to individuals who feel like federally funded institutions or agencies are discriminating against us in our communities. So if the MTA is putting too many bus depots in one particular community, any individual could bring a lawsuit and challenge them on that as such. Then the ban the box for solar, wind, and renewable energy jobs. In 2012, the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, revamped some of its regulations under President Obama, and we want to make sure that there's real enforcement in the solar industry and the wind industry and renewable energy jobs. Just so that you know, Congressman, we are training people through our worker training program to put solar panels on affordable housing, HDFCs, low to moderate income tenant cooperatives, and then 501c3 multifamily affordable housing like HCCI and West Harlem Group Assistance and others, Ascendant in East Harlem, etc. We want to make sure that they're getting solar and that we're using the people from Northern Manhattan that are trained through our programs to put that solar up on the roofs. And then this summer we're putting solar panels up on Carver houses, 4 of the buildings in Carver, and training the people in Carver to put them onto the roofs, and that those panels will provide solar power for community shared solar for people in Ascendant houses and others.
That's excellent work. Let me just tell you something about solar energy, wind energy, as it pertains to the Caribbean, right? As you know, Puerto Rico was hit by 2 hurricanes, not one, Irma and Maria. Now, I went down there several times to see the state of, first of all, energy in the Caribbean, which seems to be a very critical issue, not just for Puerto Rico, but for all the islands. And it's ironic because if there's one thing that the Caribbean has, is sun and wind, right? And so and water, right? And So we wanna see how we can work with Columbia University in establishing a platform there for resiliency, renewable energy, solar energy, wind energy, not just for Puerto Rico. By the way, I got to see how we got to figure out a better way to install those solar panels, because Hurricane Maria just ripped them off right off the ground, and I just can't believe how the strength of the hurricane, how it was. I saw how they just got ripped right off the ground. But so we have to figure out a way of doing it better, that it could sustain those kinds of wind. There's no guarantee, unfortunately, that won't happen again in any island in the Caribbean, because they're on the pathway of natural disasters, of hurricanes, right? And so we're going to be going down there again to see how we establish a platform with the university leading it, with all the experts, to develop a plan, a short-term and long-term plan with regards to renewable energy, solar panels, resiliency for the Caribbean, which seems to be right at the center of all their issues, economic and otherwise, for the region. So I look forward to working with those folks in that particular project.
So we have some WEAC members and people who live in the community that have some questions with regards to some of these issues that we're going to turn to. Emily?
Hi everyone, I'm Emily Marte and I'm from Washington Heights. So thank you for joining us today. I'm really happy that you came. So as you and most other people know, all of this concrete and lack of nature in urban settings add to water, pollution, and climate issues around the city. So how do you plan to support projects like having green spaces and permeable surfaces in the city, like in a city like New York, to make urban communities healthier and more resilient?
Okay, that's a good question. I'm also considering a legislation to help incentivize green urban agriculture, rooftop agriculture. I went to Brooklyn to see what they're doing down there, how they're having projects, urban agricultural projects in containers. You have now containers that produce kale and other kinds and broccoli, and it's not only profitable, but it's connected to food opportunities for those communities. In addition to that, rooftop agriculture, and whether or not we can provide some type of a tax credit or a benefit for an entity that will promote urban agriculture, urban gardening, open space in urban sites such as the 13th Congressional District, to ensure that that continues to move forward and is expanding. So that I'm working with Councilmember Espinal on that particular project and trying to replicate what he's doing at the city council level in Brooklyn, which seems to be very innovative work, to bring it down to Washington and see how we can bring it across the nation. That's, it's really more of a city issue, but, I'm sure that, the federal government has to be a full-time partner in getting the funding for that to happen, yes.
Hi everybody, my name is Max and I attend Beacon High School and I also am a Harlem resident.
That's what my daughter went to.
Oh really?
Beacon. You guys used to have a championship baseball team.
So I'm wondering, as chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Task Force for Transportation, Infrastructure, and Housing, what is your plan on advancing and showing your support for the Green New Deal, as well as how you're going to try to work to stop powerful greenhouse gas companies and incentivize them to start to work towards positive change in our communities?
Well, as I said earlier, I think that the Green New Deal is not just an environmentally friendly project, but it's one that could propose to provide economic development and economic development opportunities for urban communities that have been disproportionately hurt by environmental injustice, right? So people in Harlem, East Harlem has one of the highest asthma rates in Harlem in the city. You got a hot spot on 218th Street right by my house, where you have the Kingsbridge bus depot with one of the most polluted air quality reports in the city. So folks from those neighborhoods deserve to, I think, benefit from the Green New Deal, not only in the results of what the Green New Deal can offer their neighborhoods, but economically. And I think it's important that we make that connection. And that's why, as I said earlier, I'm working with Congressman Charlie Rangel, Billy Thompson, who has CUNY, and President Boudreaux from City College in developing this institute to train folks in the jobs that will be necessary to put in motion the Green New Deal. That's a great economic development opportunity for the entire nation. It's as big as, Franklin D. Roosevelt's effort back in the day to bring the country back to economic health.
I just want to remind people in the audience, I've just been reminded, if you have a question that you've written on a card, just hold them up and WEAC members or staff will come and get them from you, okay? Next.
So my name is Anthony. We met earlier. Given that 30 million Americans are uninsured, 40 million Americans are underinsured, that the leading cause of personal bankruptcy is due to medical bills in this country, do you support a single-payer Medicare for All program, like H.R. 1384, recently introduced by your colleague, Representative Pramila Jayapal?
Yes, I'm on the bill. I'm a co-sponsor on the bill.
Good afternoon, Senator Congress. So my name is Juan Flores, and I'm a WEAC Planning Committee member, and I live in East Harlem. Yes, thank you. And also, I like the fact that you support the sustainable infrastructure, and I like the fact, I like some of the programs that you are supporting, but my question to you is it the intention of the federal government to fully privatize NYCHA around 2029 or earlier? If not, how will housing low to moderate income people of color look like in the near future?
I have an answer for that over my dead body.
Thank you.
No, I think, look, there's obviously efforts like the infill, efforts, that I oppose. I think affordable housing needs to continue to be offered through NYCHA. The question is, how do we pay for the repairs? Because a lot of the repairs, roof work, pointing, boiler work, elevator work is very costly, right? It's deep packet issues. So we need access to capital. And I think that the infrastructure bill, we're gonna disagree on a bunch of things, right? The wall, the pull out of the Paris Agreement. Well, we may just be able to agree on infrastructure, right? And if we do, then I think that agreement, that bill should also include funding for NYCHA. So I've been hosting summits. We did it last year. We're gonna do it again this year, where I bring leaders from all the public housing complexes around the country, not even the city, to begin to push to change the narrative, right? And to change the interpretation and the description of what infrastructure is, away from the traditional description, which is just roads, bridges, and tunnels, and urban transportation, to include also housing. And by housing, I mean public housing, so that we can get some dollars to hopefully address some of the needs of, the capital needs of NYCHA, which are now, what is it, $31 billion is a real deep budget hole, right? That's a lot of money. And so we need some help from the federal government. We're not gonna be able to do it. The city and the state will not be able to repair NYCHA on its own unless we bring the federal government to be a full-time partner.
Better management.
Hi, well, you know who I am, but so my name is Flora. I'm a WEAC member, and I'm from Washington Heights. So going back to the ban on mercury in cosmetic products that he mentioned. So this was actually something I worked on in graduate school, where we looked. So one of the things I noticed was often a lot of these products are imports from other countries. I remember back looking at a product from Mexico called Crema Belleza, which actually had mercury in. Sadly, we know that a lot of communities, a lot of people of color, we have this internalized racism within us where we value light skin over dark skin, unfortunately. But because these are often products coming from other countries, in fact, recently they just banned a pacifier that had honey in it, knowing that honey causes infant botulism, from Mexico as well. So what can customs do? So two things, what can customs do to kind of regulate these products coming in, and at the same time working with the same ethnic communities where these products are commonly sold?
I think that there needs to be an education campaign similar to what we had with Zika, right? Where the New York City Department of Health had a very robust campaign telling women and families and couples, you know, if you go to these countries or these states, actually also down in Louisiana and Florida, you could be exposing yourself to Zika, and if you're pregnant, these are the consequences, right? And so you educate people around this particular issue. I think that on these mercury-based products, we should do the same thing. The other aspect is really to confiscate them at ports of entry and make them illegal so that they cannot be sold over the counter, because a lot of stuff that's not legal here you'll find being sold, believe me, over the counter in stores and other places. And so we got to make sure that we have an enforcement component to it, and I think an education component to it as well.
Okay, so I'm going to do a couple of rapid fire ones from the audience. David from Morning.
You sound like Errol Lewis.
Yeah, thanks, Adriano. Thank you.
Take off your hat, let me see.
No, the Yankees cap stays on.
No, you got some hair.
Representative Espaillat, how can you help ensure that revenues from congestion pricing are efficiently put to use to produce an expanded and much improved mass transit system?
Lockbox.
Lockbox. Yeah. Okay. Trump just put forth an executive order that supersedes the state's abilities to block fossil fuel pipelines. What are you doing to circumvent, this executive order if possible? And would you advise Governor Cuomo, I'm assuming, to ban the Williams pipeline? That's from NASA.
Yes, and that the states should continue to work as a team, as a block, and of course some of these executive orders could be fought in the courtroom.
Okay. Will you sign on as a co-sponsor to the Tulsi Gabbard Off Act?
Yes.
Which is, thank you. Love it. You understand
I know the
rapid fire. FDR's bill for a New Deal included public banking and public banks to fund prospective projects with interest rates.
You're not like Errol Lewis.
Would you support such public banks? Would you support public banks?
I would love to discuss it and see it. I like the idea, but I got to get more information about it.
Okay. What are your ideas about how to oppose EPA rollbacks and reinforce and strengthen the Clean Air and Clean Water Acts?
We need to go back. I think that the Clean Air, Clean Water Act should be part of what we address in the Green New Deal by strengthening it there. Okay.
That was from Ronald, who's a We Are Planning Committee member and West Harlem resident. Diara Towns, sorry. She's a resident of Washington Heights. The City Council is voting on Intro 1253, the Dirty Buildings Bill that will limit carbon emissions from large buildings on Tuesday. How will you ensure that the policies and strategies of New York City's Green New Deal scales up to the federal level for the country's Green New Deal? So,
I think we need to make that a strong ask for the 2021 election when we re-elect a bunch of the new city council members to make sure that they're committed to that particular bill.
Okay, so those were the rapid fire questions, and now I have one question for you as well. Given your role with regards to infrastructure, a lot of WEAC's efforts and energies in the last year and a half have been also focused, sorry, I thought that was okay. Have been focused on the coming of the 2nd Avenue subway, connecting that to Metro North, and the underground station that still exists below 125th Street. We want to know, in terms of, one, your efforts around infrastructure to make sure that there's money and resources for the coming of the 2nd Avenue subway, but also to tie that into jobs for the community, and to tie it in for art and cultural opportunities for the community as well. Like in the subways, the art should reflect El Barrio, the history of that community, etc. And to really make that kind of intermodal station and connectivity happen. So can you speak a little bit to that, please?
Well, intermodal is the word, right? First of all, the station at 125th Street should be a transportation hub, not just like a regular subway exit, but a transportation hub that, as you said, connects you to Metro North, but also to LaGuardia Airport via bus. And it should really connect the east side of Manhattan to the west side of Manhattan, up in Manhattanville, where we should have ferry service as well. And so that corridor should connect east to west, where there should be ferry service. Now, of course, all of that takes money, right? And so we were concerned that the 2nd Avenue subway, the extension, the second phase, right, will fall off the table, because the argument would be, right, for many people is, why ask for money for a new line when in fact the MTA is in such high need of funding right now? Well, thank God we passed congestion pricing, right? Now, congestion prices will yield funding for the upkeep and the development of the MTA. The city continues to grow, and the 2nd Avenue subway will answer to a transportation desert right there on 2nd Avenue to 125th Street. So we should continue to, the new way projects, right, are the ones similar to the 2nd Avenue subway. There are Republican members, right, and Democratic members that had these types of projects. The White House failed to keep the projects on the budget, but traditionally they've done that, and they get back on the table because you have Republicans and Democrats that have these projects across the country. The chairman, Peter DeFazio, will do a tour of the 2nd Avenue subway. I believe we have a date already. We'll let you know, so you're part of the tour. We're putting together an advisory council to include all the cultural institutions, all the environmental groups, all the business groups in the community, so that everybody has an input on the project, and that it's a public and transparent process, right? A lot of money. The governor announced it in the State of the State. I recently had a conversation with him regarding the 2nd Avenue subway. He's still committed to it, and so we hope to get the dollars to put it, to continue to get the funding to continue to move ahead on schedule with regards to the building of the 2nd Avenue subway. Some of the tunnel work up to 103rd Street, I believe it is, has already been done. But the question is, how ambitious will our 125th Street transportation hub be, connecting it to, obviously, to Lexington Avenue too, so that we can reduce strap hanger overcrowding in the Lexington Avenue line that we've seen already in the first phase. We've seen in the first phase how overcrowding has dropped from 96th Street South. So not only will it help the entire Lexington Avenue line, but it will connect people. For example, Latimer, who's the Westchester County executive, is interested in the project. Why? Because it connects to Metro North, and Metro North goes up to Westchester County. The Queensboro president is interested in the project because it connects, and the Branchboro president as well, it connects to LaGuardia Airport and to the 3 or 4 Metro North stations, new Metro North stations that are going to go to the Bronx. So this is a regional project that's very ambitious. We want to have the community behind it from the bottom up, to ensure that all the checkboxes are checked, right, with regards to environmental justice, community participation, cultural sensitivity, opportunities for small businesses, minority and women-owned businesses, jobs for the local economy, right? And that's why Randall and I are working on this institute to have them job ready so they can be at the starting line when that happens.
Thank you, Congressman.
How are you, Kate?
Good. Just a follow-up, because this is a project, the 125th Street Metro North area.
Correct.
Has been a project of WEAC's for the last 2 years. We have held over 6 town halls, developed a steering committee of government and community folks, and we've now just published a directory of recommendations.
Okay.
As we know, the Second Avenue subway will take a long time, a number of years to
Not another 100 years.
be completed. But guess what? We've got developers who already own parcels.
That's correct.
We've got a homeless situation with the
That's
city
correct.
not addressing those issues. We have small businesses.
We got the failed Pathmark project there.
The failed Pathmark project. So we really think it's important to develop a framework for development.
I agree.
And that's what we're doing, and we hope that you can be a partner
Absolutely.
in that and help us along and advise
Absolutely.
us. And that the work we've already done with the community can advise the kind of work you want to do.
We don't need to reinvent the wheel.
That's right.
We can start from the work that you've already done and move forward. I don't know how you guys feel about value capture.
We feel it's a very important thing in the process, and have some recommendations about that there too.
Because if I own a property, right? If I own an entire block, let's say, and now all of a sudden the MTA is gonna have the Second Avenue subway, and now I have an exit or an entrance of that train station right into my building, right? And now the value of my building, because of that amenity, right, is gonna quadruple, right? Now that hub, that transportation hub that's gonna have stores and restaurants and whatever, right? And a cultural institution, there's a couple of nice cultural institutions in the neighborhood. Now all of a sudden, that's gonna raise the value of my property. Well, guess what? You're gonna have to up some money now, right? You're gonna have to up some money because you just can't have it all, right? There needs to be a trade-off here, right? And so I hope to work with you guys. And we know who the developers are, and we need to sit down with them and tell them this is the way it's gonna be.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I gotta go to my grandson's baseball game.
One more thing. Can you support more funding for the World Trade Center survivors?
Yes,
And-
I'm part of that effort. It's
Thank you.
embarrassing that we are fighting for that funding to be made available. More and more people are showing up with these illnesses that are related to the World Trade attack. And it's really embarrassing that we have to even, and by the way, it's part of this anti-New York attitude that exists in Washington, that people from Utah, wherever they're from, they want to go back to their home states with a feather in their cap saying, we deny New York this, we deny New York what. Well, you know what? I'm going to punch them in the eye. Have a good day.